Good evening, and thank you for joining me this evening for this talk, a course where, this is an instruction of how to start a food forest, or, or how soil is composed, or anything like that. This is a sharing of a journey. Many people, they ask me, how do I doing a food forest, and I actually tell many people that it's more about a sort of something in your heart on a sort of philosophical level than it is about technical knowledge. I think nature naturally will reveal technical knowledge to us as we start engaging in the work of reclaiming a cultural nutritional heritage by farming or food forest or whatever. But what you carry in your heart is obviously how that's going to manifest. So I thought I'd share a bit about my journey. And many people, they ask me, well, can you tell us about yourself and where you're from and how did you come to this point? So that's what I'm going to share with you, and I hope you like it. So I was born in England, and in a very small village area, called a state called, what we call that, a county, we call it in England, um, called Hampshire. And it was all farming around us, and there were the remnants of that sort of, I don't know if you've read Thomas Hardy, of that old England where there was still this sort of respect and warmth for the land. I remember Shire horses, these huge horses they were no longer used for ploughing, but they were still there from the remnants of that. And I remember the village festival with dancing around what they call the maypole. They had a pole in the middle of the field, and everyone would dance around it. And there were still the remnants of this sort of echoes of a culture, the echoes of understanding, that we came from this earth. And I think a little bit of that, formed who I was. My mom and dad had a vegetable patch, and they were very much interested in this, in growing their own food and making their own jams and their own wine and all of that sort of stuff. And so it was a very idyllic little upbringing. And my mom especially was, and my father, they were very into spirituality in the Christian sort of tradition, but more in the mystics. And so they were naturally involved with people doing alternative things. Like there was a school on a farm, um, in Wiltshire, and I used to go to that school. It was a kindergarten, so we were very free and playing in the fields, and there were horses and cows and all of that sort of stuff. And I do feel that relationship with the land has defined me a lot. So when I was a bit older, when I was about 7, we moved to the city, to Portsmouth in the south of England, and I grew up there in um, a very conventional school education, government school, studying and trying to enjoy my life as a young kid. And then I went to boarding school, and that was quite a traumatic experience, British boarding school. And I think that hardship of being that school is what pushed me to want to really find something else, because I was like, man, I'm not going to live like this, this very British stiff upper lip and bullying and forcing, you know, your way through life. Um, and after a few years of being there, my mom helped me find a place in the Jiddu Krishnamurti school. And the Jiddu Krishnamurti school at the age of 15 was like landing in sort of paradise. It was so beautiful. The school was all vegetarian. There was no like sir and madam and uniforms. Everyone was on first names, and it was like a family. And I was introduced to J. Krishnamurti and the idea of dialogue, of discussion, and inquiry, finding out important questions like who am I, and what's my purpose in this life, my role in this world, and Krishnamurti would ask all these pertinent questions. um and we would watch these videos of Krishnamurti once a week, and they were quite inspiring. I mean, I think a lot of it went over our heads at the age of 15 and 16, but they were like seeds that were sown, that this is an important part of life to ask questions about who we are. And all the teachers there were paid the minimum wage, but they were all kind of inspired people. The French teacher had been awarded an award by the government of France for his contribution to the French language, and my music teacher, my guitar teacher, Amancio de Silva, was the Goan jazz guitarist who the Maharani of Jaipur had given his first Gibson guitar to him. And he was his music was in the British Museum of as a landmark in Indo jazz fusion. And then I studied theater again with very good directors, and I was doing research in genetic engineering with my very close friend Paco, who was my teacher, Dr. Francisco Calvo. And this school was very inspired. A teacher who had something to do could set something up, could create a new type of class. So Paco found this old sort of, I think it was like a room where they stored coal and tools, and he cleaned it up and put tables and this and that, and he made a lab. And then he would be ringing up the companies that were selling laboratory equipment and reagents and stuff and chemicals, and he'd get samples and borrow equipment and stuff. And he created a lab where he was actually with the students like me. We were writing papers on DNA sequencing, and that was quite incredible, because next to the my name was on one of the papers. I mean, it's not like I understood everything, but Paco was generous enough to put my name on one of the papers. And next to our paper there was sort of Heidelberg University. So it was quite an extraordinary learning to be in that space. And I remember one time we'd finished the first paper and we were on the second paper, and I was in the lab with a micropipette, taking out RNA, and in what we call an electrophoresis gel. It's fairly complex stuff. And I was looking out the window, and in this school, there were these beautiful trees called copper beeches, and the leaves would turn a beautiful copper color and fall. And I was witnessing this beautiful spectacle of nature. And I felt that, hang on, how am I going to understand my life going from the minute, RNA, which can be found inside a cell, to to nature, which is so vast. So I said to Paco, I've got to quit. And the school was very free like that. And Paco was they recognized that the students also had a sense of who they were and what they needed to do. So he said, no problem, you go and quit. And I left the lab and I went to the garden. And in the garden was a guy called Freddie. So Freddie was the gardener, and he was from Germany, and he was a very interesting guy. He'd work on a Sunday, he'd work on holidays. Um, for him, he said to me, so the first time I'd heard that expression, all life is yoga. I said, what's that mean? We say, well, yoga, karma yoga is a means to offer your work, to something more than you. And it doesn't happen on your work day between 8 and 5. It's your whole life. And I started spending a lot of time with Friedrich, and we used to go walking in the night. And I remember him saying to me, dialogue is very wonderful and interesting, but it's just actually yoga is something you can actually do and for yourself, and observe and grow in, it's an experiential means to grow your own understanding of who you are. And we'd go for a walk, and he'd say to me, "What are you afraid of?" And I said, "Well, I mean, if I had to walk alone at night in this forest around here, I would be really scared." He said, "Well, go and do it alone, and observe that fear as it emerges in your mind." So I started going for a small little walk around the block, and then it would get bigger and bigger until I was like 3 hours on my own walking through the forest at night, coming back at 11 o'clock at night. And that was really wonderful, and I did that a lot. And I think that gave me a lot of space in my mind to realize, that I can really do pretty much anything I wanted to do. There's nothing like stopping me to do anything in particular. Now, at that time, I was doing a lot of theater at school, and there was a very famous actor from Greece who saw me perform in Bertolt Brecht's The Caucasian Chalk Circle, and he was like, "Man, you have to go and become a professional actor in London." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Freddie's telling me all about yoga." And now Freddie had lived in Auroville in the 70s and the 80s, and he was telling me stories about riding horses bareback, and the community tree planting and the community peanut harvest, and building huts with coconut thatch and bamboo. And my mind was set, that's where I wanted to go. So I sort of dropped everything except my guitar. Guitar's always been there as a thread for me, through my life. And I started to I started to get this inspiration of going to live in Auroville. And I asked Freddie, "Well, how does that work?" He said, "Well, you have to get some money together and this and that." So I got myself a job in a few different places, and my aunt let me stay with her in London, and I was working in the hotels and restaurants and stuff, and made just a little bit of money. I think it was about maybe like $500 in total. And I put that in my grandfather gave me a belt with a zip in the belt, so you can hide all your money. And I was like, that was it. My mom dropped me in the airport. Now, my stepmother at that time was Iranian, and I had the idea from Freddie to travel across land from England to, I think it was Turkey, to Tehran, to Isfahan, to Zaidan, through Pakistan, and then into India. And my stepmother, she sort of convinced me that I would be murdered in Zaidan, so that really that's not the right thing to do. So I ended up taking a flight to Karachi, and then I went up to the north of Pakistan, where the Pathans live, and they were most generous, kind people that I had met, and I stayed with them for a few weeks, basically. Not that long, actually, because actually, in my sort of mind, I'm not much of a traveler. I've traveled a lot. I've been in Africa, Japan, all over Europe and America, but I'm not much of a traveler. I really wanted to just start farming in in Auroville, because Freddie had told me about, living close to the land, and he'd shown me his qualities of this sort of sensitivity of being in touch with the plants, that it has sort of you know grew in him, if you like. And I felt that, man, that's going to be such a valuable uh aspect of my character, if I'm interested in this yoga. And so that's where my mind was set. So I left the north of Pakistan quite quickly and came down through Amritsar. And I had another crazy idea, um, which I don't normally share with everyone, but I wanted to buy a horse. So I'd learned to ride horses in the north of Pakistan, polo horses, and that was quite an experience. And I sort of got quite confident in it. So I got to Amritsar and I asked, I asked one Sadaji, can you help me buy a horse? And they really didn't have too much ideas. But then I went to Delhi, and a friend of mine, a famous poetess from Maharashtra, Kalyani Kishore, she had a friend who was a Maharani, a queen, in living in London, an Indian queen, and she gave me contacts of someone in house in Delhi who I went to meet, and he tried to help me buy a horse. So we were in his little car and roaming around searching, and we found this place. And this guy said, "Okay, I'll sell you this horse, 20,000 rupees." And I think that's almost all I had, but I was so determined. I got on the horse, and the horse charged away, and I was there holding on for my dear life. And what I'd learned is if you pull the reins, the bit pulls the mouth of the horse, and the horse will stop. But this guy, you pulled hard and the horse would just go faster. And I was like, my God. I had a vision of us dead, under a lorry in, in somewhere in Delhi. So I kind of dropped that idea quite quickly, and I went to Benares and I spent time with this poet friend, Kalyani Kishore, and I sat with her every day doing her pujas and her havan, and that was quite interesting for me. I really enjoyed that moment of being in Benares when it was, in and we were in Rajghat where the Krishnamurti Center was, and that was very special time. And then from there, I slowly moved to Kolhapur, where I spent some time in a ashram, friends of Kalyani's, and then in the Krishnamurti school in Bangalore, then in the Krishnamurti center in Chennai. Then I met Paco, who'd got married to a Tamil girl in Chennai, and we spent some few weeks together. And then I came to Auroville, and then my story started. So I had. When I was still in England in the Krishnamurti school, I had been very inspired by Masanobu Fukuoka, who is my guru, if you like. Fukuoka is the author of the very famous book called The One Straw Revolution. Now, Fukuoka was a scientist, and he had spent a long time exploring how nature is already perfect and that you can't improve upon nature. And he developed something called do nothing farming or natural farming, a non interventional agriculture where you recognize that the intelligence in nature is what offers us, the food in the first place. It's not man's intervention, it's rather, nature's benevolence. And so I was reading this book again and again and again. And when I got to Auroville, I was searching for someone who was practicing natural farming or do nothing farming, as Fukuoka called it. And that led me to Annapurna Farm, which was an amazing farm of 134 acres that had been started by Thomas. Thomas is the one-armed Dutchman who was an amazing farmer. He was a real farmer. He knows how to produce lots and lots of food in very good quality with practices that are sustainable, that are practical, that are easily to replicate, and it always innovative. In fact, I could say that my time in Annapurna, which was about a year and a quarter, I suppose I was there in my first when I first arrived in Auroville. I could say that was like my initiation. Now it turns out that Fukuoka had actually visited Annapurna, so I was like, "Oh, I'm on hallowed ground." Fukuoka has actually been here, so I was really excited to be there, and I think that Thomas recognized my sincerity in wanting to, learn about, really learn what Fukuoka was talking about. And excuse me, and yeah, he gave me a lot of freedom. But I also learned to plow. I learned to harvest rice. I learned to thresh rice. I learned to milk cows. I learned to make the compost with the cow food, and I learned to make roads and dig ponds. And I did so much stuff in Annapurna. It's one of the times we worked really, really, really hard, and it was an initiation, if you like. And then all that time, I was still, exploring what the mother and Sri Aurobindo were talking about, and yoga and Fukuoka. And I then my girlfriend, who was with me at that time from Japan, who was also had been at the Krishnamurti school with me, she came to visit me, and we spent 4 months together in Annapurna, and that was quite an interesting time. And when she left, I realized that I really wanted to do something even more extreme than live in Annapurna and do the farming, that I wanted to start a community on my own. So I found out from people who had become friends in Auroville that there were lands in Auroville that hadn't yet been developed. And one of them was called Arania. And Arania was a 50-acre project that had been earmarked for a reforestation project, but no one wanted to live there because it was a bit farther removed from where Auroville actually was being created now. It was the original site of Auroville, but then they shifted the focus to where Auroville is now, and the lands were still there, but no one wanted to use them. So I said, "Oh, I'll go out there, and I'll live there and help make this project happen." So I went out there. I started learning about reforestation. There were there was some land within that 50 acre that was suitable for farming, and I started to grow tapioca there. That was quite interesting. All the villagers would come and buy tapioca from me, and I'd have this old scale that you'd hold with a rope, and it had a little basket on a stick, and then you'd put your tapioca there, and that the balance wherever you placed it on this stick would determine how many kilos of tapioca it was. So I had this great mountain of 2 rupee coins, because that's how much you sold it for back then, 2 rupees 50 paisa, I think it was. And I used to make tapioca chips and stuff like that. But it was a bit of a lonely life living out there. So eventually I went to Japan and I met my girlfriend. I persuaded her to come back to Aranya, and we stayed there for a little while. But very quickly we realized that was not going to work out. And then we had the opportunity to join another group of young people in Solitude Farm. So Solitude was a land right next to the visitor center, if you've ever been in Auroville. And it was a land again that no one was living at. There was not enough people in Auroville at that time. Now we're talking like about 96. It was 93 January when I first came to Annapurna, and now it was like January 96. And there were not enough people living in Auroville to take care of all the lands. So this group of young people said, okay, we want to do, like a community self-sustainable farming project there. And and I was probably the one who had the most experience, so I started doing a little bit of plowing with some bullocks and sowing green manures, and another person made a vegetable garden, and we built a community kitchen, and we got some solar panels, and bit by bit we sort of grew up that place. But I think what's really really important in a project, like when any project you start, is a commitment. And I guess that's why I tell people you need something inside, because that commitment doesn't come through. I mean, I don't know if I should say it doesn't come through something. I think it comes through really having something that has a meaning for you. And for me, Fukuoka was always that meaning, you know. And so I was trying to do farming there. I mean, I was very young. I was like 20, 21, 22 years old. And as time went on, you know, within sort of 6 months, 7, 8 months, most of the people left. They weren't, that wasn't really what they wanted to do. And even my girlfriend, she realized that living in India in a farm like that is really not her sort of karma. So she went back to Japan, and I found myself with a group of young Tamilians, actually, a couple of guys from the village, and they wanted to join Auroville, and they taught me so much about about farming, about the language, about the culture. And I think that when I look back at all the things that I've learned over the years, I think learning about language as a tool to understand a culture is probably one of the most important things, because imagine you go to live in, I don't know, Russia or Peru, and you don't know the local language. Like, how are you going to understand the local plants? How are you going to understand the tools that they have developed over centuries? And how are you going to understand the seasons or the traditional dishes that they make, and the traditions that they have? So all of that's really important, because the language is the vehicle of a culture. And that's what gave me the made me very comfortable and happy to live with these couple of local guys. Both of them live in France now. Well, one lives in France and one lives in Germany. Incidentally, they married foreigners and went off. Um, but they showed me so much. I remember Shamagam, he came to work on the farm, and we said, yeah, well, we sort of learned that from a friend in Auroville, Johnny. He used to say to people, living with us is no problem. It's, can you work with us? So we said, we started using that same thing, and then we came one day. We were there, and Shamagam was there, and he was already threshing the millet on his own. And we thought, oh man, this this guy's showing us how to work. So we learn a lot from these guys, and they're just examples of standard local guys with so much cultural knowledge, so much knowledge about how to plant seeds and how to save seeds and how to grow things and make compost and milk cows. And all of that was very normal for them. Um, and and so being with them, was a they were like brothers. We were all like brothers. We used to have this big cupboard in our community kitchen, and all the clothes were in there, and anyone used to just take any clothes they like. It was a very sort of hippie vibe. Even the cat slept in that cupboard. I mean, when I think back on it, I don't think I like that anymore. But apart from sort of underwear, we used to just share t-shirts and share different clothes, and it was kind of a funny time. We had a fireplace in the kitchen. We didn't have light, we didn't have any electricity, just a bit of solar. Um, and then it was like, oh, we have one light, no, but now we need a radio, and now we need two lights, and so it slowly grew like that. But there was a lot of community at that time, a lot of people coming and curious to see this sort of experiment of young people living together and working together in the fields. And so yeah, my life sort of was sort of, I was there. I was the steward of Solitude Farm, and running Solitude Farm, and starting to grow rice, and starting to get an understanding of all of what that meant, without having a sort of a narrative yet. That came later. I'll get into that. But as I say, we were very young, falling in and out of love, and sometimes devastating love stories. And at one point, I met a musician, and we started to play a lot together, because, as I said, all music's always been intimately entwined with what I'm doing at the farm. And so we played a lot of music, and he invited me to Italy. And I was also chasing after this one um, woman. So I left Auroville in 96, no, in 98. I left Auroville. Um, I went up to Rishikesh. I walked along the Ganga for a week with no shoes on and just my guitar. Everything was very spontaneous back in those days. And I realized that I wanted to go to Europe and I wanted to record my first album, and I needed to do some other things as well. So I went back to Europe, and I met this woman, and I found myself in Paris, recording my first album. And then this time sort of dragged on. I came back to Auroville for another sort of 6 months or 1 year. Then I went away again for another 2 years. I left for, and then I realized, when in those 2 years I worked in the Krishnamurti school. I studied flamenco guitar. I did Vipassana meditation. I did another album. I played lots of concerts. And at one point I realized, man, what am I doing? Just running around, everything I could dream of is in Auroville. Whether I want to be a ballet dancer, learning Sanskrit, and having a rock and roll band, everything is possible in Auroville, as long as you have the maturity and the vision to manifest it. So very quickly, I actually came back to Auroville, and this is fast forward to 2003. And as I came back to Auroville, I was very fortunate that my friends, had left Solitude in good hands, and I was able to pick Solitude up and start again this project. And the first thing I did when I got back was to write a list. I don't know if you've read the books by Carlos Castaneda. So he's like a shamanic teacher from South America, and he has this thing called recapitulation, where you write every name of every person that you've met, and and the significance to your life. So I started to do this list of all the reasons that I'd come to Auroville, and at the top of my list was Fukuoka. And I was like, man, am I stupid or what? Of course, Fukuoka is the primary reason I came to Auroville in the first place. The next day, after making this list, I went to visit a friend, a doctor, and he gave me an envelope and he said, "Here, this is for you. I don't want that. I think that you need this." And I opened the envelope, and it was an invitation to meet Fukuoka. I couldn't believe it. I thought he was dead. And I had no money, which has been a common theme throughout my life. But I don't want much anyway. But I had no money, so Thomas, who the one farmer from Annapurna, he had some money. He said, "Look, I've just got an inheritance. You have that money, and get to the it was in Vandana Shiva's farm was the conference with Fukuoka. You get there and go and meet Fukuoka." And then there was no place to stay. Vandana Shiva's place was all full. And another friend who was a Vipassana yogi who I knew from Auroville and Rishikesh, he said, "Oh, I have a tent. You can stay with me." So I stayed with him in the tent, and I spent 5 days with Fukuoka. And that was for me, what we call in India, Diksha. That's the initiation. That was meeting my guru. And from there, the whole narrative started. Everything now that you hear me talking about on the Instagram and the YouTube and occasionally on the TV, that all emerged from Fukuoka, from meeting him and understanding that that is my dharma, is to follow what Fukuoka was talking about, which is an honoring Mother Nature, recognizing her inherent intelligence, recognizing that she knows more than us. And he told us many beautiful things. One of the things he told us when we met him, I mean, he was 92 years old in his indigo kimono and wooden chapels and long white beard. He said to us, only a fool will understand nature. The clever man will never understand nature. You know, the clever man, someone like Elon Musk, puts a rocket ship, you know, with a car on it and goes it to outer space. You have to be very smart to do that. You might despise the man, but he's definitely very smart. And and yet you look at all our cerebral learning, you look at, you know, how much we've accomplished as human beings, but there's also no water left in Chennai or Hyderabad or Bangalore, Mumbai, or in England, or in Germany, or in America, Australia. You know, mankind, with all his cerebral pride and accomplishments, has compromised the most basic needs that we have on this planet, which is food and water. So that's what the inspiration was to meet Fukuoka. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there for this first talk. I've given you quite a, I mean, I don't know how interested you are. Many people asking me about my life. I mean, so this is kind of like a biographical, you know, chronological story of how I arrived to meet Fukuoka. And I would say the learning that happens after that is not a learning of 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. You know, you get 9 and you add 1, you don't get 10, you have nothing. It's more an unfolding of an understanding that is already inside of us. And that's why I say to people, you know, it's more important what's in your heart rather than what you think you're going to learn on a technical level, because it's that that will define what you manifest. And you know, there are many great teachers along the way that have been there for me, you know, like Ramana Maharishi and J. Krishnamurti, Sri Aurobindo, the mother, Nisargadatta Maharaj, Ramakrishna Paramahansa, Vivekananda, you know, Yogananda, all these great teachers, Amritananda Mai, and all the great jnanis of India. And also the great texts like Dattatreya from the Avadutta Gita, the Ribu Gita, Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata. All of these things have really, you know, help sort of me understand what's moving me in my heart, because it's that that will define what you manifest in your fields. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope that it's been an interesting 45 minutes with me, and maybe I'll ask if there are any questions before I log off. Are there any questions?
I've just opened it up. Anyone can unmute themselves if you'd like.
I see Manohar is clapping. Thank you so much.
I'm from US right now. Good evening to you. First of all, very inspiring. I heard a lot about you. I had associated with Mr. Vijay and Sambrand of Aurobindo Trust when I was with HDFC Bank heading the CSR initiative. So I visited your place also. Right now, of course, I'm with my daughter in US. I'm representing my son Matiraj, who is into food making. So two things. One is he's very keen to see how food can be made for the customers. He's running a restaurant in Chennai. From plants and ingredients from a medical standpoint of view, he is exploring more and more to see how the food can be as valuable for the people as possible without the current kind of contaminated kind of food. But how can that be pure? That is one. Secondly, he wanted to understand what are the menus, dishes that promote flavor and healthy eating. Thirdly, he wanted to see if he can visit your farm in person to understand better how your farm. He also has a small farm near Chennai, 1 acre, where he has put in a lot of organic activity, but he has not been successful. So these are few things he asked
So
me. He
we'll
wanted
we'll
to
just, if you don't mind, we'll just give this 5 minutes because the time
yeah,
is kind of coming
yeah, I
to
know.
an end.
Yeah,
But to answer
yeah.
the question, third question, very easy to come and visit us. Saturdays 11:30, we have a free farm visit. So any Saturday 11:30. The
Okay.
second question about the menus and the and that is a question of exploring a cultural heritage. Like if you say you spent the next week in going around villages in Tamil Nadu with a flask of tea and a packet of Marie True biscuits and ask all the old people, you know, what did you, சின்ன வயசுல என்ன சாப்பிட்டான்? Diwali time, when there was rain, heavy rains, what did you eat? When there was a drought, what did you eat? How did you eat this? And you compile the dishes, you'll see that those foods are medicine. Because I think you're Tamilian, no?
Yes, 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 sir. Ama, sir.
So unaveva maranda, no? Food is medicine. And you see that knowledge is in a culture. It's the thing is we've been and now to answer the first question, you see we've been conditioned to have certain values, and all what my talk was about is about more recognizing what's in our heart, more of a tattvam, no, a philosophy, that will drive us, because that exploration doesn't come from chapter 3, chapter paragraph 4. That inspiration comes from from an inner dedication, to find out and explore and understand the importance of soil. But that is a whole, that's why this is a series of 4 talks, because that's the whole talk about, about soil, about culture, is about how foods emerge without, how they grow without effort, how they have huge medicinal value, no carbon footprint, all the qualities of local foods, which are the very foundation of a cultural heritage. So that's something that, if you don't mind, I think we can just leave it for there, because it's a huge discussion. But there's not really the scope to go into that right now. But I advise your son to come and visit, and then we can move it from there. Meeting group what was that message? To meeting group chat, kindly share the recording of this video. Yes, we will share the recording of the video. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to do this again next week. It will take a little bit of organization from our side, but yeah, I will keep everyone informed. Okay. Thank you so much.